Hello! We now have Project 5, a Warhammer 40k Imperial themed knife with matching scabbard. As you can see, I'm starting with the usual cutting down a plastic tube for the handle and a fiberglass rod for the core. I then sand down a bit of the tip to get ready for our flexible tip and attach some fiberglass ribbon to it. Next we cut up a bit of lead to jam into the base of the handle to give the knife better balance, and then seal the bottom ready to pour in the resin. I then fix it all up onto my lovely it's not a tripod, it's a grabby holdy thing, and fill the handle with resin and use the resin to effectively glue on the fiberglass ribbon to the end of our rod. I then cut out some rectangles of 5mm thick foam and measure out a strip in the center of one of them so we can cut out our groove to put in the core. The core is then hot glued into place with about an inch on the end to give us a flexible tip. I've made a short about how I make flexible tips for LARP weapons in the past, so you can just look at that for details. Then I make sure to attach the third layer so we have a nice sandwich, and then measure up the shape of the blade that we want to create. This allows me to sand down the tip on the table sander, and I'll then use the Dremel for detail work, and in this case for the notch for the thumb. I'll then cut out notches in the back of the blade, and next adding in the handguard and extending the handle with foam strip. This is to make sure that the pommel is nice and padded so it doesn't take anyone's eye out. Here we're adding some foam to the handle. It's just a rectangle of foam with one end cut at a rakish angle. That's so when I stick it to the handle, I don't have to just butt two bits of foam together, and I can create a nice edge. Next, I will get some plastic fishing line and wrap that around the handle going up. I'll then glue on some 2mm thick foam onto the side of the handle to give it more shape, and then add on some foam to the pommel and carve out a bit of an eagle's beak to match the Imperial theme. I'll actually use some of the fishing line to create a loop to hang the blade off later. Bash it with my hot gun to seal the foam and give it a quick coat of diluted contact adhesive to help the latex stick. And then we will add on 2 layers of liquid latex with a touch of black acrylic paint added to make it easier to spot the bits you've missed. And once those 2 coats are dry, we then do our 4 dunk coat. It's very simple, just cover in latex and remove all the bubbles and drips before it dries. Then it's 2 layers of black latex with the air gun. Next I mix up some metallic silver powder in with a little bit of black acrylic to give this layer of latex a metallic effect. Next I mask out the handle and mix up some red latex just to give that a quick bash. Now that we've got all the layers of latex sorted, it's detailing with the airbrush. First I add some red to the handle, and then after removing the masking I go over the entire thing with black to give it some depth. Now that the knife is done, it's time for the sheath. I'm going to be using some thin veg tan leather. Leather tends to come in 2 types, veg tan and chrome tan. Veg tan means it's been treated in ye olde methods, and chrome tan means wonderful chemicals have been used to treat it. Almost certainly involving chrome. I roughly measure out the size I want the sheath to be, and then add a little bit extra around the sides and cut out both the top and bottom. To attach both sides together, I'm going to use this strip of leather that I hammer a hell of a lot of holes into. You can't see it well here, but I'm basically hammering out 2 lines of parallel holes. It's absolutely tedious. That's me scoring a guide edge around the edges of the leather. This is your introduction to leather burnishing. If you've just cut some leather and have some fluffy ends, you'll need to burnish it. This is what I'm doing here. Basically getting a bit of wood, and after putting wax or some other cream onto the end, rubbing it vigorously with your wooden stick until you get a smooth edge. Fortunately, I have a attachment I stick onto the end of my multi-tool, which saves me from doing a lot of rubbing. I realised that because the leather I'm using for most of the tool is very thin, it needs something in the centre to give it some rigidity, and that's what the thicker black leather is for. And here I am hammering holes, lots of holes. As I plan on gluing this piece of leather to the inside of the scabbard, I just need to sand down the surface so it'll glue better. This bit of leather is going to be used for the belt strap, and more holes, hammering holes, lots of holes. It gets very tedious hammering all these holes. You get kind of very used to repetitive, dull, brainless tasks. Lots and lots of tasks. And because I've cutting out more pieces for detail work and more burnishing with my special attachment. The straps on the sheath need a skull detail, and I'm just hammering that shape out. Basically you just wet some leather and hit it until it looks kind of like what you want it to. Next I am trying to dye the leather. I'm still practicing with this, so I kind of wet it first and then dry it. It doesn't give it the right colour, so I just add more dye until I get it the shade I'm after. And I finish it off with a final coat of dye when the leather is dry, which seems to give the best effect, unsurprisingly. And then give it a final wash once the dye has dried to remove any excess dye so it doesn't bleed all over the place. And there we go, painting the skull motif in metallic, and I remember the tip of the knife just needs a touch up with Isoflex to seal it completely. Once the dye has dried on the bits of leather, they need washing to get the excess off, so it doesn't bleed on anything that touches it. Now we're attaching the belt loop onto the side of the sheath. Next we're gluing the thicker leather onto our sheath and hammering some more holes, and now we get onto the sewing work. Technically, because the leather's been glued on, it doesn't necessarily need sewing on, but it gives the belt a little detail work, and it makes it look pretty, I guess. We like pretty things, don't we? More sewing. Lots more sewing. I need to get myself a proper leather stamping machine, because doing it with a hammer just doesn't cut it. I need to stop every 5 minutes and hammer more nails in. Because I'm using waxed cord, once I've finished it off, I set it on fire just to melt away the edges. This is not the first time I'll be hammering holes into this strap, and it's certainly not going to be the last. This strap needs to be thick, as it'll hold the front and back of the scabbard together, but it certainly makes hammering the holes in much more difficult. And here you can see me finally sewing the front and back of the sheath together using that long strip to attach them both. Basically, I've got a very long bit of the waxed thread with a needle at both ends, and I'm just sewing them together with a cross effect. It's kind of fiddly to get right. It's sort of difficult to get into a good flow. Getting to the end of the scabbard is quite difficult because the leather is being stretched around the tip. You kind of have to be quite delicate with tightening the leather into place, which I of course managed perfectly without any mistakes or errors. Yes, perfect. There we go. Almost done. We're in the last straights now. It's at this point that I start realizing that I may not have given myself enough cord. I start worrying and stretching it out as much as possible. But fortunately, I managed to have just enough cord. I'm not really sure what I'd have done if I hadn't have had enough excess. Then once again, tying off the cord and melting the excess. Now we're gluing on the detail bits of straps to the scabbard as needed. And to ensure the blade slips in and out easier, I'm gluing on some foam onto the inside of the scabbard. Some would say it would have been easier to get that foam onto the inside of the scabbard if I'd have done it before I sewed up the scabbard. Bar humbug, I say to you. that's something that happens to people with 20/20 hindsight. Next, I'm just cutting out a bit of thick leather and shaping it for the top of the scabbard, and just finishing off the foam. I need to sand down the leather to get rid of the sealed surface. Contact glue much better to the top of the scabbard, and then I use more flexible leather paint to give it the metallic effect. And then I use some silicone spray lubricant to protect the weapon and make it easier to sheathe and draw the blade. There we go. Ah yes, proof that I definitely didn't mess up on the end. It's easy to fix in this case. I ripped one of the holes, but I was easily able to just add a little super glue to fix it in place, and it's invisible and you can't see. And there we go, our Imperial blade and leather sheath. Yeah, that'll do.